Yes, hello and welcome to this episode of Her Story. Thank you for joining me from Taiwan and Sister Kakay from the Philippines. It's a pleasure having you over. And it's long overdue that we had a conversation, about Taiwan, for example. We haven't had that as yet. So I'm looking forward to learning and knowing and hopefully having a vibrant discussion about your countries. Starting with the fact that we've just celebrated Mother Language Day, and while all of these celebrations are happening globally, we do see a language death in both countries, in the sense that because of cultural assimilation, government policies, that's the general trend when you're talking about indigenous peoples, no, and language death is one of them. um what how does the state play an active role in causing it in both of your countries? I'll start with you first, if you'd like to go first.
Okay. Actually, the Taiwan government that we just celebrated yesterday,
Yeah.
but to my people, it's really sad because we are from an unrecognized as indigenous group in Taiwan, so we was not included in the celebration. But hopefully that my many non-recognized group, especially the youth from the groups, we already made a video to let people know that we are still speaking our mother tongue, and even we was not included in the government policy, even we were not really supported by the government, but we still let people know who we are and we are what we are doing. And we also record a video to show everybody. And we already did a video broadcast the day before yesterday, and many people very surprised that wow, the indigenous people, maybe they doesn't know we are indigenous, but they say, well, there are still many different language are speaking in Taiwan now.
Right.
So,
Right. Do you see a greater participation in indigenous youth, for example, people from your community, the Parpara community? Do you see
yes,
that
a
trend
lot.
changing?
Um, in the past 30 years, actually, like my parents or my grandparents, they are very afraid to let people know we are indigenous people because they are facing a lot of the, when people know you
Discrimination.
are indigenous people, they will feel have yeah discrimination or they do something bad really on us. But recently, in my age or the younger age, we are not afraid because maybe we have more confidence to let people know who we are, or we have more capacity ability to make our life better than before. I think those are two reasons.
Right. Kakai, what is your opinion? I mean, do you see the similar kind of resistance to indigenous languages and from the state in terms of policy, in terms of culture, that kind of invisibilization of indigenous peoples? I mean, language is obviously one of them, but I'm sure that many other levels there is that concerted effort by states uh, for indigenous people to assimilate into the mainstream. What do you think in the Philippines?
Here in the Philippines, as we know, has we have so many indigenous groups, and since then, we indigenous peoples are having many local languages. So the mother tongue which they speak on the community is
Right.
still practicing until now. So on the regards on how we celebrate the mother tongue celebrations, we are not consciously making this event as the other event we are doing, because also the government is not consciously making this event as big events for the indigenous people. So that's
Right.
what I can say.
Um, which leads me to the next question of, colonization. I mean, we've all experienced colonization in all of our countries, India, Taiwan, Philippines. What does that continue to look like in today's Taiwan and the Philippines? Can you just shed some light on that historical sort of oppression continuing into the 21st century? How does that look in today's modern times? Could you just shed some light? Could you go first?
Actually, when we talk about this, first thing I really wanted that everybody would know is that people is life, culture is life.
Mhm.
So no matter what we are going to be, but if we don't forget who we are and the true value that our ancestors give us, actually we are still indigenous people. But about this is unfortunately when we want to learn something new or we want to learn something that makes sure we can still keep ourselves alive on the earth. Yes, we only have 24 hours. So the people would, if I learn enough, then maybe I don't have time to learn more things like our traditional knowledge, even how to cook our traditional food. But it's really sad, but in Taiwan, we are still struggling for the young generation, especially for the people who just go to school, like 6 years old to 12 years old. Those children, we will ask them to come back home after school, and the elder of the community would try to have a circle, and then they can learn everything that we used to learn
Learn.
from my parents. Yes,
Yeah. Okay.
that's what that we were trying to fight with this. Yeah.
I think in terms of like you were talking about how there are two groups that are that one is recognized by the Taiwanese government and another isn't, which includes your community as well. Um, you know, Obviously the group that is recognized would then get a lot of state benefits, and the government centralized policies would be directed at them. What is the unrecognized group which sort of missing out on? What are the key benefits, for example, in the government that your groups are missing out on?
Because actually it's a long story. It's not only the Taiwan government right now, but also the past who already colonized Taiwan. But they separate into two groups because one group they are from the high mountain area or the not really high. The other side of the other side of the mountain is the part of the place that is really hard to reach. Used to before, but our people we live in lowland. It's really easy for the outside people to come. For those people, they say we are lowland people, and it means that the capital or the city, or those things they are in our traditional territory. So if they recognize us, it means they have to give back the land right to us. But for the government, they're afraid. They're also
Right.
afraid they recognize more group, more indigenous rules they need to follow, more rights they need to give us. So they rather to for think as we are non-indigenous, we are just normal people, so they're easy to control. And another thing is that they also educate all other people. Oh, they are non-indigenous people. They already become the people without culture, without language. So the government just give the recognized group. They just give them some resources, some support, even the law to protect them, their land or their culture. But they are afraid. They also teach them if if the government recognize more people as indigenous people, then the resource will be getting limited if you want to share to more people. So this is another political game. But fortunately, some friends from the recognized group, they finally know the real the fact. So they are trying to come back to support us, but there are very few. So I guess Black people, we are trying so hard to build a good relationship with others, especially recognized group. We hope because they can speak and they can make
Of the past.
law. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Do you see that same kind of division, that attempt to divide and rule in the Philippines, Kakay? I mean, or are the indigenous groups, have they formed a sort of united resistance and a united front when it comes to state oppression and pushing back against state violence?
Yeah. Since colonizer, already our colonizer in the first place is the what they call this mm, Spaniards. No?
Yes.
So they colonized the Philippines also because of their objective to colonize the lands, the natural resources, and also the people. So since then, many decades, they are here in the Philippines, and then the colonization of the Japanese and colonization. The last colonizer is the United States. So all those colonizers are use the sword and the cross, meaning to say the fascism and the religious or religion. So that's how the indigenous peoples are pushed from the lowland to the upland. So as we know now, here in the Philippines, all the indigenous peoples communities are in the upland. Not only a simple upland, but in the highest peak of the mountain
Yeah, the most
because of
hostile
this.
areas, I suppose.
Yes, because of these decades of colonization. So when I speak to fast track the history of colonization, the establishment of Philippine government is uh, they have the initiative in 1960s. They have the initiative to create the Commission on National Integration just to win over the community of indigenous people to register in the mainstream. But the indigenous communities is uh, have the strong resistance on the mainstreaming in all aspects on our life, like the ownership of the land, the how we name ourselves through the church baptism, and also how they create the commission as just two is a part of colonization also. Just in the aspect of political aspect, they use this commission just to have the people for voting purposes like that. But since then, uh, indigenous peoples in the Philippines was not really recognized as people of the Philippines. We are categorized as on the side of the church, we are pagan. And also in the eyes of the government system, we are not included in the documents of the Philippine statistics like that. So from there, as a history, um, fast track history, when the church come to our community, they are the one to recognize us as people. So they teach us how to recognize ourselves as people, not even indigenous peoples, but as people, because they created the what they call this the Church of the People, because at the time the Vatican issued the liberation theology. The church changed their way of serving the church, not only inside building of the church, but go to the community of the oppressed, depressed people.
Right.
So that's how I recognize the series of colonization and how they change the mode of colonization through by the church that we all recall this make aware that we have the right as indigenous people. We aware that we should assert our right as Filipino people. So since then, we come up into organizing ourselves in the local level. So also from the church program, they established the literacy and numeracy program just to educate our brother and sisters that are not really go to church, go to school because of this elite mentality of the one only go to school are those children of the elite
Mm.
and in the mainstream.
Mhm.
So we cooperated with this program of the church, and we also established this simple education of literacy and numeracy under the big three, shade of big three, under or besides the riverbank, where indigenous people are come together to learn.
Mhm.
So that's how I recognize and see how we make ourselves got into the mainstream. So when the church introduced us in the mainstream, so that's the start of how we assert our rights as indigenous people, as Filipino people, and also our rights to self-determination.
Right.
So from there on, so at the early stage of 1980s, we established the nationwide unity of indigenous people to establish the organization of indigenous people, which is the Katrina.
Right. Right. Do you see something similar through religion in Taiwan? That happens. That's a very common thing that happens in India and Northeast India as well, and some parts of mainland India, where the church has been quite active in civic society in trying to educate, giving access to indigenous people, and we refer to as tribal people in tribals in India. That in itself is a derogatory term, right? So a lot of the access to education, a lot of access to English, for example, speaking in India, if one speaks English, one is considered elite, right? So the church has a lot to do with giving access to indigenous people's education. Of course, that has also meant that we've also sort of lost out on our indigenous practices to a large extent. Do you see something similar like that happening in Taiwan, let's say, regarding the church, for example?
Yes, of course, everywhere. Even not in Taiwan, not only church, but also the Buddhist,
Right.
even everything. Everyone
Yeah.
is one, actually.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you because it's interesting, whenever I talk to women and especially indigenous women, we've all sort of faced stereotypes in our countries, like, particular stereotypes. What are some of them that, I remember you telling me something quite particular that you sort of faced when you were working, at the workplace. And that's just one of the incidences that you had recounted. What are some of the stereotypes that indigenous women face, for example, in a deeply capitalist society like Taiwan, for example?
Normally, they have still we've got a lot of bad impression, not bad impression, discrimination about if they know you're indigenous people. Like myself, because I don't have the legal indigenous status in Taiwan, So when my boss they just accept my apply. So they didn't see anything that show I'm indigenous people. They think I'm a Han people, just like a normal Taiwanese. So it's really okay. Yeah, it's just okay for me to get higher job or get higher salary if my capacity is okay, no matter I'm a woman or not. But when they now I'm indigenous people and they know that I'm going to get married or even I'm going to have baby, now everything becomes more problem for them.
Because of the
Yeah, it's
paperwork
very difficult for
involved.
them. Yeah,
Mhm.
yes.
When you
And
say
yeah,
you're not legally recognized, does that mean that you're not a citizen of the country, or are you?
I'm the citizen, but I don't have the indigenous legal status.
Right.
Because if you're indigenous people in Taiwan, you can learn your mother tongue in school. They have a special course, and they have the special health insurance for that.
Right.
Even they have some resource or some funding for indigenous community, so you can preserve your culture, or even you can do anything you want to preserve your land, or even to let the young people to learn something if they don't have money. Yeah.
So let's say, for example, the non-recognized groups, if you were to, let's say, meet publicly in a public space to express your culture publicly, would that be considered illegal, for example?
Yes. Yes.
And would that
So
then be criminalized, and would that you open you up to, let's say, police brutality and other things where people come in, like the police particularly obviously interferes and disbands people from public spaces and prevents them from gathering in public.
not really like that, but it
Okay.
means um actually in Taiwan they are very open. If you want to show your culture or your language, it's fine. Even you want to let the outside people come to your community to learn something from your community, it's also fine. And it's very popular. But the difficulty one is that when we talk about the status, the same community, one is recognized, one is not recognized. If the young people want to go to a higher, better school, it's really difficult for them because, in community, it's really hard to get a better environment to have a better education. But if indigenous people, they have special places for the people to go. So if we are non-indigenous, you just need to follow us, the normal people, just like that. So it means in my community, if the young people they want to jump to another better university, we really need to work very hard, and we need to earn the money by ourselves. Yeah, because the government won't give you any support, something like that. Yeah, that's just one of it.
I think it's important for people to realize that when you are historically oppressed, I mean, that oppression kind of trickles down through the generations, right? Things that are accessible to, let's say, two previous generations for other communities is still not, available to people from indigenous backgrounds, for example, so that causes people to kind of constantly keep sliding down in terms of getting access to education, not having the money to go and, to pay for your education, not having a group to sort of advise you intellectually to how to kind of navigate those systems. You said that Taiwan was, for example, a very open society in terms of allowing people to express the softer side of their culture. How does that discriminate? I'm interested to know, like, for example, in keeping with the progressiveness, Taiwan is the first country in Asia to recognize, gay marriages, for example. How does that translate to indigenous people of let's say, of the LGBTQ community? Would they have the same sort of privilege to be able to get married and be legally recognized?
Actually, I don't know other indigenous in other country, but in Taiwan, the LGBTQ we think they are natural, you know. So
Mm-hmm.
to indigenous people, we love everyone. Everyone is our brother and sister. So they get married. Actually, in indigenous people, we used to get married and recognized by the community people. We don't use the married law or even need
And
to
this applies to
register
same-sex
in.
people as well. Are you saying that even previously in indigenous communities in Taiwan, for example, marriages within same-sex or unions within same-sex people was recognized by the indigenous community?
Yes, if you already get the recognized by all the community people and elders, then you are couple.
Right.
Yes, actually, in my community,
Okay.
but because there are a lot of different groups in Taiwan, I don't know other group, but normally what I heard from other community, they are very, actually they are just like us. We love them as our brother and sisters. But
Mhm.
it's very fortunate that Taiwan already recognized they as couple by legal. So yeah, that's very good news for them.
It is good news at one point, but when you're talking about, let's say, interpersonal relationships and public spaces, for example, for we know it's difficult for anybody who's looking at an identity which is not mainstream in that
Yeah,
sense. Would, of
yeah.
course, would that sort of discrimination that anyway is layered as an indigenous people, would that also mean that as somebody from an LGBTQ community, that would be added also, like if they're indigenous, if they were navigating, let's say, public spaces, in the ways that they choose to dress, in the ways that they choose to express themselves, would that, I mean, how is Taiwan, in a sense, culturally, are they open to um, LGBTQ people? And for example, if there is an indigenous person who is also a LGBTQ, how would that translate um, in Taiwan? Would they be victims of, let's say,
Um,
violence, discrimination, stigma, all of those things?
yeah, of course. But actually, they are also facing a lot of things that other people, other LGBTQ they face in other countries,
Mm.
especially they know you are indigenous people. There were like a double discrimination on it, and
Yeah.
mm, but you know, many young people like me and other, we are trying to we have a lab broadcast and also talk with other people on the street to let the people know, to understand them, and trying to show our love to everyone.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I know before the people are very, some people even they are afraid they will bring some disease or something. They
Right.
think they are very dirty, but that's not true. So let's see. Maybe in the next 10 years, you can see more people who are willing to let people know they are LGBTQ. Yes.
Right, right. Stepping out of the closet. Kakai, we've seen President Duterte making homophobic comments all the time. That's a dangerous precedent when somebody who's in the leadership position, for example, makes those kind of comments. It sort of opens up, I think, more instances of violence towards people, who are marginalized. Um, what is the situation like for, let's say, indigenous youth who are also LGBTQ in the Philippines? What kind of discrimination do you think they face, considering the leadership itself is making homophobic comments?
As part of discriminatory uh, of the government with the indigenous peoples and especially to the LGBTQ, um, it's our right to assert the rights of the LGBT, uh, even in the community level, because the system of feudalism, patriarchal, and like that is many communities is still the mentality of the old people is there. But because we are mostly organized in terms of on our area of responsibility, the community is educated how to deal with the LGBTQ, and we proved that these individuals has a difference in selecting the textual identity. We smoothly educate the community because many of them are also part of our organizing to involve in our struggle. So the old is see the result on how we organize them. So it's now that the communities are recognizing the LGBTQ, and even in the mainstream, because the Filipino movement is very strong. So, but we still asserting the rights of the LGBTQ in the mainstream because the first one mentality of the government is LGBTQ is only on inside the beauty parlor. No? LGBTQ is the dirty, not immoral, like that. So when the movement recognize this identity of individuals, so it's a part also on the assertion of our rights as Filipino people, assertion of our rights as individual, not to discriminate on all social services. So even in the employment, it's not really on Indigenous peoples. We have no cases on Indigenous peoples are not accepted in particular labor or employment. Other story is for the Moro people. They are very discriminated in acquiring white collar jobs. But in Indigenous peoples, once you have the criteria, for example, the 4 years course, you have it and you have the capacity. So no matter Indigenous or not, you are qualified for the work.
Right.
But still, because of the labor law, that is the question. How the Indigenous people is really enjoying the rights to be employed. But because of this system of contractualization, there's no big space or opportunity for the Indigenous people.
Right. Speaking of how countries are progressing, you go into general elections in May, and as I understand, one of the presidential candidates is Duterte's daughter. What is your assessment, and what is your forecast on? I know it might be true, it might come, whatever the results are. I wanted to talk about what do you think about the presidential candidates in the running at the moment, and especially Duterte's daughter. Do you see her continuing her father's bloody legacy, for example?
Yes, that is 100%. She will continue what her father is doing at present because their tandem with Marcos, they blatantly say on their speech, on the broad people speech that or the campaign, because now is a campaign period. So they speak on the public and they said that they will continue their father legacy on how they rule the Philippine society. So we are not hoping that if these two will get the seat, we will continue our positions, our struggle, not to be on the seat like that. So during this election, we have also the campaign, the political campaign on never forget
and never again Marcoses on the palace, and also Sara Duterte will not get the seat.
Do you
So
think that there's a sizable vote bank that would vote for her, and what does that vote bank look like? I mean, you know, she clearly is okay with not changing her spin, her electoral spin. I mean, she's keeping it the same things as her father. Um, do you think that sort of violent appeals to people is appealing to a certain section of the vote bank? And who are those people who are most likely to vote for her?
for there is a political party or group that is uh, supporting the people's agenda. No? So like we have created ever since 1990s, we created the Indigenous Peoples agenda. So this is the basis how we deal with the politicians. And now we also made the broad alliance of Indigenous peoples, member or non-member of Katribu or Bai. This broad alliance we call One Sambubungan. So we expanded the thematic issues inside the Indigenous Peoples agenda, and this agenda is always the bottom line of how we making advocacy and network to the politicians from Congress slate, senatorial slate, and especially the presidential slate. So this how we work now during this campaign, and we blatantly no for the no talk, no advocacy, no networking with the Duterte and Marcos slate, because we know that this group is carrying the main issue we are suffering until now. What is this? The 100% wantonly giving the permission of foreign investors on mining.
Right.
And also this
yes, continue, please.
and also this rampant violation of indigenous people's rights, the extrajudicial killings, the red taggings, which they carry all on this, and they say that they will continue the national task force to end local communist armed conflict. So we are trying not to so we are gratefully campaigning that never again.
Okay. Where does the support for her, for example, come from? Civic society, the Filipino society, for example. Who are the people who are voting for her there? Are they the rich, the wealthy in terms of class?
No, the pro Marcos and Duterte is really the one who are Marcos loyalists, and also the one who are we call this the people who are not really know what happening or denying the history of Marcos during his time. So we really making a double task to educate also Filipino people during this electoral campaign, like that. And also on the business sector, they are also divided, and even in the side of the armed forces of the Philippines, they are now divided. Right. So hoping that all the church is solely solid. The Catholic Church, the Protestant, are solid for the opposition, the uh, Leni Robredo and Kiko Pangilinan, the opposition of Duterte and Marcos. So only the Iglesia, they call this the Iglesia ni Cristo, we call that. That is a long history of Marcos loyalists. So only that side of the church. But on the civil society, they are all on the side of this, we have tomorrow the color pink. We have that campaign.
Okay. We've seen that. Speaking of precedents, we've seen that yours has also issued a historical apology to Indigenous peoples, in Taiwan. Has that really meant more than rhetoric? For example, has that really trickled down to real change, or is it just talk as usual, like just politicians talking? What do you think?
Actually, yes, that's met the Taiwan mainstream people. They started to rethink about what happened for the past, what they are doing, even what happened on indigenous people. But to my popular people, it's really difficult because she not only apologized to the indigenous people, but she also promised that she will give us our legal recognition in 4 years. But unfortunately, till now, we didn't hear any change. Even some elders, they already wait for the recognition for over 40 years. Even some of them already passed away. But the good news still isn't coming. So, yeah, to us, we are still waiting for her promise to become true. But it seems very difficult because there are only 2 years left for her mandate. So, yeah, I'm here. I'm really strongly ask our President Tsai. She's also a very good president, but please, I hope you remember what you already promised to us. Yes, many elderly passed away. We regret things.
Do you think the person who's going to possibly kind of replace her, how strong is, let's say, the Democratic Party in coming back to power? Do you, I mean, I am to understand that this is the second term, so she won't be re-elected, or will she be? Is she going to be able to come back a third time?
Maybe could not because due to our low, she could not.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, before ending, I mean, we've talked about a lot of things, politically, socially, all of those things. Where do you see us engaging, and how do you see us engaging with governments, for example? Because they are the ones who we keep seeing, a lot of resistance from. How do you see Indigenous people, especially the unrecognized ones, sort of making that change? I know it's going to be incremental. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a long journey. But what do you see, in terms of the way forward?
The only thing is that we make ourselves to be part of them. I mean, we are trying to we are trying so hard to start struggling and even protesting and even broadcast what our issue in the past, and have tried so many years, even my grandmother, grandpa. But now we understand if we cannot be the political man, it's really difficult because everything decides on their hands. Yes. So now we are trying to, some community, they are trying to educate some young people who will have the capacity, even have the, some charming. To many mainstream people will like them and try to vote him to be the or her to be the political party the leader of it. So let's see what we can where we success or not.
What do you think? Does the road forward mean training young youth leaders to join electoral politics from indigenous communities? Do you think that's one of the perhaps most powerful ways to represent indigenous peoples and bring about change?
Yes, because if the people say please follow and respect the law, so that's still what they are saying right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Kakay, what do you think? Do you think the same route applies of joining electoral politics, of encouraging indigenous youth to represent indigenous communities at the parliament, for example? Do you think that
Yes.
that is one of the ways?
Because since Philippine government recognized the party list of the sectors, so our indigenous youth is belong to the Filipino youth in general. So since 2006, the party list of the youth is on the Congress. So many indigenous youth also aspiring to be with that group, and we are helping them to the party list because this party list is headed by the youth students especially and the professional, so they are more familiar with the indigenous youth because we encourage them as part of our advocacy. We encourage them to immerse or integrate in our community. So that is one development on how we are advocating the indigenous plight in general.
Okay, thank you. I mean, on that hopeful note, thank you so much for joining me today for this episode of Her Story. We look forward to kind of having many more of these conversations. I think it's important that women particularly sit and discuss these things and compare notes and see where we are all headed. All the best to you in your resistance, and you Kakay. I mean, you are clearly a force to reckon with, and I do hope you also kind of meet success in whatever area of focus that you have decided to build your resistance on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank
Okay,
you,
thank you.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye. See you again